This is Thank You Mama, weekly lessons from mothers all around the world. Hello and welcome to Thank You Mama. My name is Anna Teider. My guest today is Lena Livinsky. Lena is originally from Poland. She currently lives on Long Island. Hi, Lena. Welcome.
Hi, Anna. How are you doing today?
I'm okay. I'm limping still, but
yes.
And trying to keep my motivation high to heal my foot soon.
Yeah, it will. In given time. Yes, for sure.
So, Lena, you are a speech pathologist and you have a podcast called The Accented World. You work with learning disabilities, with accent. You're an accent coach. Tell me a little bit about your work as a speech pathologist.
Yes. So speech pathology, usually people think, when they think of speech pathology, they assume what we do is just work on like speech impediments and if somebody's having trouble pronouncing something or stutters, but it actually expands to much more than that. We work with children and adults with language disabilities, with speech disabilities, with swallowing issues, with feeding issues, and it really spans into many different areas. Reading, writing, it's really, really broad. But what I like to do the most, because I am still working full-time as a speech pathologist, aside from being an accent coach, I like to work with feeding. So I work with children, and it really goes from babies, so from 0 to children and adults who are older, on feeding. And what that entails usually is finding a way for them to eat food by mouth. Because a lot of kids who have medical issues or some kind of disabilities, they might have a feeding tube. So we work on, weaning them off the tube and work on eating by mouth in any way, shape, or form. Not everybody has a feeding tube, but a lot of them do. Or they have a very limited diet where they do not want to eat like a variety of food. So we work on expanding that and working on accepting not only different foods, but different textures of food. Because typically what happens with the kids who are so picky, they have issues with the texture of the food. So that's really what I do mostly at work because when I'm still working as a speech pathologist. And then in terms of accent coaching, so this is something that I do in my business. And it's something that I'm super passionate about because I moved to the US when I was almost 15 years old and I didn't speak fluent English. I learned it in high school. And what I didn't realize at the time, I also modified my accent. So what that meant is that I started to speak more like an American. Looking back at why I did that, because I didn't do it consciously. It was very subconscious for me. I think I was just so desperate to fit in with my new American friends and boost my confidence. Because when you have an accent, sometimes your confidence is low when you want to express yourself because people can judge you for speaking in a different way. Whenever you're different in some way in the society, you stick out. And if you're not strong enough emotionally, that can be very, very difficult for a person. So I work with my clients who want to work on their accents because it's really near and dear to my heart because I know how I once felt when I used to have an accent. But I think personally, accents are beautiful and it's something to be embraced. But as long as you are understood and you don't have to repeat yourself all the time, because that can be very, very frustrating and it can stand in the way of achieving many things in life. So I can help my clients.
I want to ask you a little bit more about accents because I have this crazy accent.
I love your accent.
And then I want to talk to you about your podcast. Do you have a feeling, do most of your customers come because they're hard to understand when they speak English, or do they really want to sound more American? I'm curious because I I was lucky that I went to an international school in Vienna, and everybody had an accent there. And I think that taught me to embrace accents and embrace this diversity in our speech as well. And I've learned that the most important thing is that we are being understood, and it absolutely doesn't matter what your accent is like.
So that's a really good question. And I do have to say, a lot of them come because they want to sound more American, or they want to speak like a native. And I think it's a total misconception, because I think it will help them feel like they fit in a little bit better being in a new country. But I do not support the notion of trying to modify your accent to speak like a native, because, well, there's many reasons for that. First of all, because it's almost impossible to achieve after a certain age. So it's like setting yourself up for failure. And I would never want to do that to any of my clients. And second of all, I think it really, it's not a very healthy way of thinking about the way that you are. It's basically changing your identity in some way because you want to be more like an American and forgetting your culture. So I really, when I work with my clients, I explain that to them. It's not about speaking like a native. I think it's about embracing who you are, but giving you the tools to give you the confidence to really express yourself. I think the biggest thing that you should work on when you have an accent and you are not clear when you speak is that clarity piece. To speak in a way where you can be understood. Then the way that you communicate when you do have an accent, it's really up to you if you want to polish it and speak more like a native. But it's not something that I necessarily want to work on with my clients.
It's funny you mentioned identity, because I am a little bit upset that I have this accent that you can't locate and identify. I wish I sounded like more Eastern European or German, because I'm Austrian and Croatian. So I wish it would be easier to identify it, because way too often I get asked if I'm French or Dutch or anything else but where I come from. And sometimes I'm sad about it. I'm like, why don't I have an Eastern European accent?
That's so funny. The problems we face. But I get it because you want to, it's part of who you are.
Yes, exactly. And
So I can relate to that for sure. My accent, it still comes out. I don't have a perfect accent because I learned English at a later in life. And the critical period for language development kind of is around the age of 8 years old, 9 years old. If you learn a language by the time you're 8 or 9, you can still learn it as a native. But anything over that, you never will speak the language that you learn as well as your native tongue. It's just the way that the brain works, and it's just something that people sometimes have a hard time accepting. Yeah.
Tell me about your podcast.
So my podcast is called The Accented World, where I interview immigrants and first-generation citizens and world citizens who are inspiring and have inspiring stories or are successful in life, because I aim to inspire the immigrant community to dream big and really come out of their shell and pursue their passions in life, career, and business. Because I think there is a lot of negative stigma around immigration out there, and I want to share those stories to show what immigration is really like, who immigrants are, and how amazing it is to be able to travel the world and live in different places, and the amount of, the amount of knowledge and experiences you gain from that. Yep. So I like to interview people like that on my show to not only change the conversation, but to really inspire the immigrant community to know, like, if you move to another country, it doesn't mean you have to pursue work that is maybe a little bit more basic than what you studied at home. Because a lot of immigrants who come here, they're educated people. They just cannot work in the degree that they have, whether they're doctors or engineers, because you have to go back to school and get an equivalent of a diploma here. And, it's not only time consuming, it's money is involved. So a lot of times they don't have an option to do that. So I like to, show them people or inspire them through people that have these amazing careers that are maybe a little bit outside of the box. Yeah. So that's what my show is about. And it's a platform where people have accents or don't, but it's a safe place where you can just be yourself. And we embrace who you are.
Awesome. We'll put a link to your show in episode notes if any of my listeners want to listen.
Thank you so much.
Before we jump to talk about Mama Weronika, let's talk a little bit about Poland, because I've learned that it's great when we talk about our countries and our cultures a little bit and not take it for granted that people know about them. I just Googled Poland and I was shocked to see how big it is. Now, I come from Croatia and Austria, so for me everything is big, but Poland is 38 million people.
Yes.
Where is it exactly? Let's start with basics.
It's in the heart of Europe. So it's located literally in the Central Europe, even though it's considered Eastern Europe. But it's right next to Germany, Slovakia, Czech Republic, Ukraine. There's like a little bit of Russia above us. Russia, like aside from the huge country that they also have like a little piece right by Poland. But yes, we have incredible neighbors to each and every side of us. And we also have the Baltic Sea in the north.
And Poland is very ethnically homogeneous. I read that 98% of people are Polish.
Yes, because after World War II, which was very unkind to us, we actually used to be one of the most diverse countries in Europe. But because of the war and because of everything that happened, the diversity unfortunately disappeared. But it's slowly coming back to major cities.
Nice.
There is a lot more diversity that you see now. Yes.
So Poland was the first country to be invaded by Hitler, and it's where World War II started. That's what you were talking about.
Yes.
Anything else you want to mention about Poland?
It's a beautiful country to visit and to see. I think there's so much. It has so much to offer, even though it suffered so much after the war. But it's been rebuilt. There's still so much history there,
and culture,
so much culture. Yeah. It's a beautiful culture, and Polish people are very welcoming to guests. If a Polish person hosts you at their home, there is this belief that we have is that if you have a guest at home, you have God at home. So they really treat you like royalty.
Nice.
So you go and you have like a full blown dinner, and you'll have alcoholic drinks or whatever kind they offer you. But it's a very warm country in terms of our hospitality. So I definitely recommend anybody who can travel there to go. It's a safe place and it's a beautiful place.
It is. And Lena, when you left Poland, what was it like? I think you're too young to have experienced the Iron Curtain.
I was born 2 years before it actually ended, but I didn't really experience it that much.
So Poland was part of the Soviet bloc for a long time. And what was it like when you left?
Well, I lived in a very small town in northeastern Poland. So for me, that's basically all I knew. My dad did take us on a trip. I forget how old I was, but I was, before we left for the States, and I saw Czech Republic and I saw Germany, and I was lucky enough to go on a trip to Italy with my school. But other than that, and traveling to like a major city here and there, I lived in a very small town. So my perspective, I think, will be very different from somebody who grew up in a big city. But I loved my childhood. I was devastated when I had to move here. The only good thing about moving here for me at that point was that my family was finally together, because before we moved, my parents used to travel to the States for work. They just couldn't, they couldn't sustain. They tried a few businesses in Poland, but they just didn't work out. So for me, that was the first time my family was finally united. But other than that, I loved my childhood there. It was incredible. I was always outside playing with friends and riding my bike and learning new things. Polish schools are in general extremely very good. Our curriculum is one of the best in the world, our schooling system. So, I was constantly challenged, and it was a really, really nice childhood. I was then moved to the United States, which was quite a shock for me.
And now we're jumping into Mama's story. So Mama Weronika is also Polish. Tell me about her.
So my mom is one of 5 siblings. And she grew up in an even smaller village near to where I grew up, but it was actually very near. I mean, when I was little, it seemed like it was 10 kilometers. It was like, whoa, very far, but it's really near. But she grew up there, and she also had a very tough childhood. They didn't really have a lot of money growing up. And my mom, she told me a story that when she was 3 years old, her house burned down. So she just remembers walking in the middle of like a deep winter in the snow, shoeless, and, going to like a shelter by a friend's house or something like that. But she had a very difficult childhood growing up. And then when she was 16 years old, she was the youngest out of all her siblings. Her parents left for the United States, and she didn't see them again until my brother was born. So 15 years later, 15 years, they were here where they didn't even see each other, because back then you didn't have Skype or anything like that. So all you really could do is, I guess, write letters. That was a very difficult thing for her, because she grew up, without her parents really at such a vulnerable age, where she had to become an adult very quickly. She didn't really get support from her older siblings, aside from her sister, who's closest to her in age. The rest of the siblings, they had okay relationships, but she didn't have like a safe place to be until she met my dad, and they married pretty quickly.
Were they very young?
They were very young. Yes, he says they were. So my mom was 22 years old when she got married. So I guess 6 years after her parents left. Then she had, a stable home with my dad until they both started to travel again for work to the United States. So she's definitely had a lonely childhood and life growing up. I have to say, it was not easy. It was a lot of goodbyes.
And so they went for work to United States because her parents were there, I'm guessing.
My dad's parents were also here for many years. My dad used to come here more to stay with them. My mom didn't start coming to the United States until after my grandparents came back. And they never returned to the United States aside from visiting us.
Oh, they went back to Poland? You don't hear that often.
Yes, they moved back when my brother was born. So when my mom was about 31 years old. So she used to come here to stay. And my aunt and uncle, she used to stay with them and work. So a lot of times she would live in if she was taking care of somebody, or if she was cleaning and, working for somebody. Because oftentimes that's what happens when you immigrate to another country and you come for work only. So that's what she was doing. And she would live with in some homes, or she would stay with my aunt and uncle.
So at 40, she moved to the States with you.
Yes. She was, I think, 45 or 44.
Oh, wow. That's a big move for that age.
Yes, it is.
And you said she didn't really speak much of English, and it was quite hard for her in the beginning.
Yes, absolutely. She still has, she speaks okay, but it's definitely not like a fluent language for her. She still, if she watches American TV, she needs the subtitles in Polish, and she can hold a conversation, but it's with a broken English. But she is extremely brave. So she knew coming here, she didn't want to clean houses. She didn't want to do that because she had ambition to do other things and possibilities, because we were lucky enough to have the papers, right? We had a green card and we came here legally. So she decided to go to a beauty school and become a hairstylist, which she's loved all her life. She was always passionate about that. And so she actually went to school and she finished, where to me, looking back, it's quite incredible because she had to take written exams. She had to communicate only in English. And that was only a few years after we moved. So, props to her for doing that.
Yeah.
It's pretty incredible.
Yeah. And for starting a new profession in your late 40s.
Mm-hmm.
I'm amazed. I'm listening to these interviews, and my guests tell me so many stories about women starting a completely new profession in their late 40s, 50s, even 60s. And I find this so motivating and inspiring that to know that it's never too late, and you can do it. You can, in your 50s, you can decide to acquire a new profession. That's beautiful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's never too late. I don't know if you've heard of the book, The Choice. I think it was Egger, Dr. Edith Egger, who's a Holocaust survivor. So she didn't start to study. She's a psychologist now, but she didn't start to go back to school up until her, I think, late 40s. And she didn't write her first book until her late 80s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It's never too late. There's no such thing. It's just an excuse. Yeah.
So Mama Weronika, I don't know if you mentioned it already in the interview, but I have it written down that she owned her own salon. She runs her own business now, which is awesome. Bravo, Mama Weronika.
Yeah, bravo. That's right.
So let's talk about lessons. Let's talk about what you've learned from her.
So the first one that always sticks out for me when it comes to my mom is kindness, just because she is the type of person to take her shirt off her back and give it to you if you need it. She's always very kind to other people, and she instilled that in my mind from when I was very little. I used to have a friend growing up in Poland who had a disability. So she had a cognitive disability. Where she was kind of like part of an inclusive classroom with us, but she was really the only one who struggled. So I remember from being very young, my mom always made sure I played with her. She was like, if anybody ever picks on her, you need to be there to defend her. You need to help her. But in a way where she instilled those values in me, where I just felt like it was the natural thing to do when other kids were sometimes cruel to her or excluded her because she was a little bit different, let's say. I always knew since I was a child to include her in my group and I was the one who would go to her house and we played Barbies together. And it was just something that my mom always instilled in my mind since I was little, is kindness and sharing with others. Because even though I didn't have my parents with me growing up, which was really devastating to me, which is something I still deal with today, and I've been going over in therapy, but I had a lot because they used to come to the United States and we had this beautiful home in Poland. It was huge. My dad built, and we always had so many clothes and so many toys. So my mom always, told me to share and to share with those who needed them. So I always loved that lesson from my mom, is to be kind, especially with people who have a little bit less than you.
But I hear that's what you're doing in your work now, helping people who need help.
Yeah,
that's beautiful. How that you can see this lesson in your profession and what you're doing right now with speech pathology.
Absolutely. Yes. I think it has definitely a lot to do with my mom, because how I didn't do it consciously, but it just, but yeah, once I found the profession, I was like, that's it. This is what I want to do. It was perfect because I knew I wanted to help people. I just didn't know in what capacity. And then I learned about speech pathology, and it just was such a perfect match for me.
Any more lessons?
Yes. So she always tell me about independence. So my mom instilled in me the value of being self-sufficient and independent from a man or from somebody that I was going to spend my life with in case I needed to take care of myself. So independence in terms of financial stability, independence in terms of my education, independence in terms of really me as a person, where I didn't depend on other people, just because everybody's story is so different in life. And I'm very lucky to have an amazing husband, and we've been married for almost 9 years now. But you just never know what kind of relationship you're in. So I was prepared from when I was young to be able to take care of myself. And I value that lesson a lot, because I think it's important for us to be able to do that.
And sometimes relationships are even better because you're independent. Who knows what your relationship with your husband would look like if you depended on him.
I couldn't imagine that.
Yeah. Do we have more from Mama Weronika?
So another one that I, really, really cherish in my mom is what she taught me is bravery, because she was very brave in everything she did in her life. From a young age, she had to be independent just because of the way that her life worked out. But she's always been so brave, and she's always been not afraid to pursue the things that she wanted in life, including, the beauty school, the hairstyling school, where she really should have failed. I mean, if you're going to look at the statistics where she didn't speak the language, it's amazing that she did it, but she never looked back. She never questioned it. She just did it because it's something that she wanted, and she pursued it. So she is a very brave person. And, and I cherish that in my mom, because she taught me about bravery since I was very young as well.
It's funny, when you and I talked about her, I only had 2 lessons. I've only written down the independence and kindness. And now while you were describing her life story, I also wrote down courage and being brave. And it's interesting. And now you're mentioning it as a lesson.
Yes,
it's so
absolutely
obvious from her life. Yeah. Any more? Or are we jumping into, was there something you wish she taught you?
We can jump into that. So as amazing as my mom is, nobody's perfect, because if somebody tells me they're perfect, I call them out, because it's just impossible. It's an incredibly erroneous, something to look up to. It's impossible to be perfect. And that's what a human being is. We're imperfect, and we go through life learning lessons. So my mom, she had a hard childhood. So I think there's a lot of trauma that she's been through that she still hasn't addressed, that, kind of manifested itself in how she handled herself in life and how she spoke to us when we were younger. But one thing that I'm still working on, and it's something that I really made it my prerogative to heal from, is her constant comparison of us to other people. Because I think comparing yourself to anybody else is, first of all, ridiculous, because there's nobody else like you out there. So how can you compare yourself to anybody else? Because everybody's different. But it really, I think, stopped me from being myself for a long time, because I always had these ridiculous standards to look up to, because my friend did this, or my friend talks like that. She has these kind of relationships, or, that family is like this and our family is like that. And it was just those ridiculous standards that I grew up with as a child that carried on in my life, mentally, unconsciously, as an adult. So there's been a lot of undoing for me in terms of that lesson. So that's definitely something that I wish my mom didn't do growing up, but we're working on it.
Good. I had a very close friend whose parents would do that. And I was very shocked every time I heard it. Whenever they would say, but look at Anna, I was just like, no, don't look at me, because I come from a completely different family, no, it felt so wrong,
She definitely stopped doing that, maybe 80% of the way. Once in a while, she'll still tell me but this and that. I'm like, Mom, no. Absolutely not. You know my answer already. Just no. Don't even start. But it happens a lot, and I wonder if it's an Eastern European thing. Because,
I do too.
Because there's a lot of friends who dealt with the same thing.
Yes.
Yes, and it's can be so detrimental to your mental state. It's so difficult.
Yeah. Lena, before we recap, I had a feeling you had more lessons. Did you have anything more you wanted to share?
In terms of positive lessons?
Yeah, well, any. Every lesson is a positive lesson.
Every lesson is. That's right. Because
No matter
we learn
how
from
we learn
failure.
it. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Well, one lesson that I have been really sticking by the last few years is just being yourself, which is basically the opposite of comparing yourself to other people. It's just all have special gifts that we're here, we're sent to this world, I believe, to share with everybody else. We're all unique in a different way. And I think that stepping into those gifts and our uniqueness is something that is such a positive thing. It's something that really we're meant to do as people. So it's something that I'm, learning and adapting to my life the last years, and just being yourself and stepping into your greatness per se. I think it's such an important lesson in life. Is that instead of chasing something that's impossible, just being happy with what you have and embracing it. So I think that's an important lesson in life that I wish I learned a little bit earlier.
Very important and very, very beautiful. Should we
Absolutely.
recap, or is there anything else you'd like to share?
No, I think, I'm just very excited to talk to you today because this is such a different podcast. It's great to talk about my career and me as a person, but to talk about like your childhood and your relationships with your parents, which are so shaping. They're so crucial to who we are. So to talk about them, it's so refreshing to me. And I'm really grateful to be here. So thank you.
I'm so happy. Isn't it beautiful? Because it's so eye-opening and it touches on topics that once we start thinking about them, they seem so obvious. And we're like, why did I never think about what I've learned from my mom? And it opens our eyes to who we are and why we are how we are, but also towards our mothers and grandmothers and who they are and where we come from. I think it's a very important exercise to do in life. And I'm glad that this podcast is inspiring so many women to do that.
Absolutely. Yes. It's so important because really a lot of our psyche is shaped until we're like 7 years old or maybe 14 if we're like being generous. The way we grow up, those relationships, the lessons that we learn from our parents at that age, they live inside of us. They kind of continue in our hearts well into adulthood. And whether they're positive or they're negative, they're there. So it's worth uncovering what you learned because a lot of the times it's not something that you can just remember that my mom said this. It could be something that is kind of stuck in your memory and stuck in your body and it drives the way you act today. And if it's something that's negative, it's really worth exploring so you can kind of heal that part of you and unblock yourself.
And forgive. I think that's an important part of this exercise. Yeah.
I think so too.
Well, thank you so much for sharing these. Let's recap them very quickly. I have kindness and compassion, independence and self-sufficiency, courage and being brave. I also wrote down, you didn't mention it as such, but we said that we've learned from Weronika that it's never too late, that you can start a new life in a new country, in a new profession, you know, in your late 40s and 50s.
Yes, that's an important lesson. Thank you for that reminder. Absolutely. Yes, never too late.
Never too late. I wrote down gratitude and being yourself. And something you wish it did teach you is not to compare yourself to others.
Yes.
Yeah, this was a beautiful conversation. Thank you so much,
Thank
Lena.
you.
Thank you for being my guest.
Well, I had such a good time, and thank you again for, sharing everybody else's voice and their stories about their moms and having this platform because I think it's such an amazing space. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you. Thank you, Lena. If you enjoy Thank You Mama and want to help it grow, please take the 2 seconds to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps. If you'd like to get in touch, you can send me a mail at info@thankyouMama.net. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter under Anna Teider, that's Tajder. This was Thank You Mama. Come back next week, subscribe, and tell your friends.